Today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Budapest meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Yesterday, Rubio became the first U.S. Secretary of State in 7 years to visit Slovakia. Rubio interfacing with two of Europe's most conservative leaders and outspoken supporters of President Trump following his trip to the Munich Security Conference. While in Germany, Rubio encouraged European leaders to imagine a new world order. It comes after a year of uncertainty surrounding Trump's tariffs and threats to take control of Greenland.
We can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nations. We do not need to abandon the system of international cooperation we authored. And we don't need to dismantle the global institutions of the old order that together we built. But these must be reformed. These must be rebuilt.
Want to bring in now MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, who was just at that Munich Security Conference, and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration, Joel Rubin. He is the author of the Briefing Book on Substack. David, Slovakia and Hungary's leaders are some of the most far right in Europe. What is Secretary Rubio hoping to accomplish with both of them?
It's not clear. It was interesting because he was very effective in Munich. The speech he gave to European leaders did sort of reassure them. There's still a lot of fear in Europe that Trump wants to seize Greenland, and they don't quite trust this situation. But then going to these two countries, they're really the closest two leaders to President Trump and, frankly, President Putin. So you have Western Europe really pushing to cut off energy supplies or stop buying energy from Russia, and Hungary has been buying oil from Russia. And when President Orban met with President Trump in person in Washington recently, the sanctions other countries face that buy Russian oil were taken away from Hungary. So it seems like if you're close to President Trump, you get to do what you want. And it's, a concerning effort, according to some critics, that it's all about who is most loyal to President Trump.
And they say, Joel, that all politics is local. So Orban's political future is at stake when elections are held there in April. Despite that, Rubio promised American support this morning. Let's listen to what he had to say.
President Trump is deeply committed to your success because your success is our success. Because this relationship we have here in Central Europe through you is so essential and vital for our national interests in the years to come. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. I'm going to be very blunt with you. The Prime Minister and the President have a very, very close personal relationship and working relationship. And I think it has been incredibly beneficial to the relationship between our two countries.
So, Joel, in this case, it may be geopolitics is local. What's the strategy here in throwing U.S. weight behind Orban at this moment? What is the foreign policy objective for the U.S.?
Yeah, Ariel, this is another norm-shattering way to describe American relations around the world. Quite frankly, we are not used to having our Secretary of State endorsing foreign leaders, but that's clearly what just happened. And, for the Trump team, they have a lot of close allies in Eastern Europe in particular. Coming out of Munich, it was maybe a bit of a reset speech, but not an apology tour by any stretch. And I think what we're seeing is the Trump administration wanting to really solidify these relations in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, of course, and we also have seen in Argentina. We've seen it around the world with other countries, and Israel will have an election later in the year as well. I'm sure we'll see President Trump engaging in that. So it's really trying to make a constellation of allies that are tied to the personal brand of President Trump, even more than to the United States overall, which is very much a new wrinkle in how we engage the world.
Is there a sense that there could be a strategy here to support and bolster those leaders that have been friendly to Trump so that they can maintain power and then later put pressure on those different governments to do what we need them to do when it comes to Russia and when it comes to the Middle East?
Possibly, but the real push that we heard in Munich from European leaders and from, frankly, senators, and there were several moderate Republicans there, was for President Trump to get tough on Vladimir Putin, that it's the United States that has the power to do that. There's sanctions that have been talked about, new, really tough ones that could be carried out by the United States, and that's what we heard. So it's not, I'm just being honest, I don't think Hungary and Slovakia are going to suddenly force Vladimir Putin to give up the war in Ukraine.
So you were just on the ground there in Munich speaking to leaders there. What was the reception to Marco Rubio's comments in the plenary? And then I know you told me offline that there was a lot of concern still about Greenland.
Yes, and so there was, behind closed doors, the senators were trying to calm European leaders that Greenland was over. But publicly, the Prime Minister of Greenland said that this is still seen as this huge threat to her politically, and there's great nervousness. The leader of Greenland was there also. They do not want to be taken over the United States, so they don't trust President Trump. The damage that was done in Davos and this constant, desire to just take a country shocks Europeans. I mean, these are democracies. It would be essentially, Britain deciding that they want to take over New England, and it's just hugely unpopular in Europe. So I just being there, it was really visceral to feel that lack of trust of President Kennedy. Again, Rubio, a smart speech, a more diplomatic speech, but the specter of Trump and frankly how unpredictable he is hung over the Munich Security Conference.
And Joel, we know that there were a lot of Democratic leaders who were there as well. Democratic Senator and Foreign Relations Committee member Chris Coons traveled to Munich with other lawmakers. He spoke on Fox News yesterday about Rubio's focus on Western civilization and the message that could be telegraphing to European allies. Let's listen.
He talked a great deal about our shared commitment to Christianity and to European culture. His focus on the civilizational ties between the United States and Europe left a number of folks in the audience who I spoke to later who are trusted partners from Japan, from Korea, from India, democracies that the United States has long partnerships with. It left them somewhat cold.
I should have said non-European allies who were watching that. And the speech took place, though, in Europe. So some would say it was appropriate for him to focus on what was going on there in front of him. But the world was watching this, Joel. So how will this be received by our allies like India and Japan?
Yeah, Ariel, an American leader making an ethno-nationalist speech in the heart of Europe, in Germany, of all places, where ethno-nationalism combined with fascism created the most cataclysmic war in history of human race. It's really dangerous. It's dangerous talk. Certainly, from a very pragmatic foreign policy perspective, our allies who are not Christian and white will feel offended. Certainly, the ones you described in Japan and in Asia. But I do think for Europe to hear that and to hear an American president essentially pushing language, and a Secretary of State in this case pushing language that they've been trying to get away from ever since the end of World War II, trying to not have a descent back into the kind of ethnic war that caused hundreds of millions of deaths over centuries, and certainly more than 100 million in the last century. It really is not the kind of message that they want to hear if they're looking to us to lead in a partnership for more peace.
So, Joel, we're seeing the EU turn elsewhere for trade, striking a historic deal with India last month. Is there a concern that the tariffs are turning allies away from trade in the U.S. and with the U.S.?
Yeah, again, Ariel, on the practical level, right? So you have the philosophical discussion that we're talking about and the themes that are being promoted. But what it does is it tells countries that you're not really important. Relations don't matter upon shared principles, free markets, democracy, human rights. They rely on the personalization of the foreign policy, and we're going to tariff you if we don't like you. And India is a prime example of a country that got tariffed basically because President Trump and Prime Minister Modi had a personality clash. And so they're going to look for more reliable partners. And we're not demonstrating reliability as opposed to our adversaries like China, who are more than happy, and then, of course, our friendly allies in Europe, more than happy to step into that gap that we're creating as sort of a self-goal, self-harm that we're engaging in right now. And these countries want stability in their trade practices.
And yet the U.S. is still an economic behemoth. David Rohde and Joel Rubin, I should say, thank you both so much.